inquest into the deaths of the London Bridge terror attack victims begin later today. Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones were killed by terrorist Usman Khan on Friday.
The attacker was convicted of a terrorism offence in 2012 but was released after serving just half of his 16-year prison sentence. The victims' families say they don't want the tragedy politicised, but it has raised questioning about the sentencing and monitoring of terrorists. And we're joined now by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Just everyone's still reeling from the horror of these attacks. And we have, in particular, this irony that they were attacked at a conference which was about showing faith in people who had been convicted of offences and could be rehabilitated. And then Usman Khan showed how, in his particular case, that was a false hope. What do you think this says, then, about sentencing?
Well, I'm going to come to that in a second, and we've got to focus on the worst of humanity. But can I thank you for the last couple of days and focusing on the best of humanity?
Yes.
You focused on Jack and Saskia. They were people who had this great future in front of them but dedicated their life to helping others. And you've also focused on the heroes, the ordinary Londoners, who did extraordinary things.
Well, we have, but we've actually predominantly focused
but also, yeah,
on sentencing. And there's an interesting thing there, because the father of Jack Merritt has been very outspoken since his son's death about the need to not use his son's death as an excuse to be tougher on sentencing. And yet I would say, from the reaction we've had, 99% of the British public find it inexplicable that a convicted al-Qaeda terrorist like Usman Khan is released after just 8 years and is then able to commit mass murder.
Well, I think it's really important that people like me, politicians, journalists, actually ask big questions that must be asked, because we've got to learn the lessons to make sure we're as safe as we can be. And there are lessons that...
Was it wrong to release him?
Well, I voted against a sentence that judges had the power to impose called an indeterminate sentence to protect the public. What that basically meant was a judge could say, you're a convicted terrorist, you're not to be released until we're convinced you're no longer a danger to the public. It was this government that took that sentence away. I voted against them and I opposed them.
And Usman Khan was originally on an indeterminate sentence, but on appeal that was changed to a 16-year sentence with automatic release at 8 years.
And that's my frustration. My frustration is you're only hearing half the story. My frustration is was echoed by Jack's dad, a knee-jerk response. What are the facts? The facts are judges used to have this power to give an IPP. This government took that away. Do you know why? Because they wanted to reduce prison numbers to save money. The other point about prison is that they shouldn't be warehouses where you simply hold people. You've got to punish them and reform them. Here's the problem. People are being released without being properly rehabilitated because of cuts and the privatisation of probation. But also, once they're released, they're not properly supervised. So you're asking all the right questions about what happened in this case, what happened in the case of the other 74 released on licence, what happens to those convicted of terrorist offences. But be very careful, 8 days before an election, where politicians appear to be tough without explaining their responsibility over the last 9 years.
But let's come back to my original question to you, which is, should he have been released?
Well, I've seen no evidence that he was no longer a danger to the public.
That he was what?
No longer a danger to the public.
He's an al-Qaeda convicted terrorist.
No, here's my point, Piers.
I've seen no evidence that he was no longer a
So
danger
he pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. Well, my point is, why is he even being automatically released?
Well, my point is, had I won the vote in Parliament and I opposed it, he would have been on an indeterminate sentence.
Can you answer the question?
Which meant he couldn't have been released.
I get it. I get that. But my question is, do you think he should have been released?
Well, clearly not, because he
went... That's what I wanted to know.
Well, clearly not, because he went...
So what do we do? Dominic Raab yesterday said something that I've been calling for, which is that we have 74 prisoners in this country who are on whole life tariffs. They don't get out, whether it's the Yorkshire Ripper, the killers of Lee Rigby, whoever it may be. They're deemed so dangerous that we don't ever let them out. And yet we have 74 convicted jihadist terrorists who are now wandering the streets, many in your city, the capital city here, and I don't understand why. Because aren't they, as we have seen, very likely to do what we saw with Usman Khan?
Well, firstly, question, how did Dominic Raab vote in 2012 when he abolished IPPs, number one? Number two, I believe judges should have the powers to impose indeterminate sentences to protect the public, which means judges have seen the evidence, judges know what the person's done, and they will then give the indeterminate sentence. Here's the conundrum. Sometimes the CPS can't have a charge of terrorism on the person, and they're convicted of other offences. It's the Al Capone strategy, where you can't get them for terrorism, so you get them for other stuff.
Usman Khan pled guilty to wanting to create terror camps in Kashmir, in Pakistan, right?
And he should have received the indeterminate sentence.
But the decision, sorry...
But should he have received a whole life sentence?
But the decision...
That's what it means, Piers.
No, it doesn't mean that.
Until they can persuade... Until they can persuade the authorities...
An indeterminate sentence... Well, let me explain to you what it is.
Let me explain to you, because
I think you're wrong.
Sadiq Khan's the lawyer.
I think you're wrong.
Well, let me finish my sentence. I mean, I'm pausing to breathe, Piers, not because end of sentence.
Go on.
Well, an indeterminate sentence means that a judge imposes this, which means they can't be released until the authorities are persuaded that person is...
But a whole life tariff means that is never a conversation. They don't come out. My point is there's a qualitative difference. And I don't understand why we treat serial killers, child killers and the killers of Lee Rigby differently to how we treat convicted jihadists.
Yeah, you're
That's
right.
my point.
So there are a small number of people in prison. There are a relative small number. We have, roughly speaking...
74 of them.
We have 88,000 people in prison. So a small number of people who are in prison.
But there is a difference, except there is a difference between indeterminate, where it then goes back to people having to assess their risk, to whole life, where that is not a conversation. They don't get let out.
There is.
There's a difference, right?
There is. And roughly speaking, of those in prison for terrorist offences, roughly speaking, 75% are Islamist terrorists. Roughly speaking, 15% are extreme far-right, and there's a small number of others. And I agree. And actually, not only do I agree, Her Majesty's Inspector in 2011 was really concerned about prisons being places where these convicted people can be even more radicalised, but also people who went in for other offences, not terrorism, were being radicalised in prisons. Well, I'm sorry, Piers, who's been in charge for the last 9 years?
I agree with this. Mr. Khan, can I interrupt?
So when you've got Dominic Raab on, don't want to say, when you've got Dominic Raab on, ask the other questions as well.
Because I don't want... Of course this is political, but let's not keep blaming the other party.
I was responding, to be fair.
OK, the point that Piers is making, and is backed up, it's not a point that's agreed by everybody, but a number of people, a huge number of people have got in touch with us to say the only way that you eliminate the risk of a terrorist who has been convicted is to keep them in prison for the rest of their natural life. Why do you think that that is too draconian?
No, that's not what I said, to be fair. What I said was that judges should have the tools at their disposal for the appropriate cases to give sentences where it could be.
But you're not arguing
but what Dominic Raab said
everybody.
yesterday, and I totally accept, by the way, that this is after the milk has been spilt in many ways, but what he said clearly was that in some cases with convicted jihadist terrorists, they should get whole life...
I agree.
You agree with that?
I agree, yeah.
Right, so this is...
There are some people...
Then there's a consensus,
but Piers, there are some people who can't be reformed on a whole range of offences. They could be child killers, they could be terrorists, they could be the Mara Hindley types, the Yorkshire Ripper types, right? I accept that.
But where is the threshold for you? Because a number of people say that Usman Khan should have faced that sentence for being part of a plot to kill.
What used to happen was when there was violent and serious offenders, that was the definition used before in relation to indeterminate sentences, a judge had the tool in his toolkit or her toolkit to give this sentence. You're making a different point, which is judges should also have a tool in their toolkit to give whole life, meaning life. And I think that's a discussion Parliament needs to have.
It's now risen to a new record high, more than 15,000 offences in a year for the first time. Well, I mean, we've clashed about this before. It absolutely breaks my heart every time we hear about a stabbing in the city, as it would anybody around the country. Why are we not doing enough? Why are you not doing enough in London to solve this problem, save our teenagers?
Well, look, both of you have talked about the personal consequences of violent crime. I met yesterday another bereaved mum and dad who'd lost their son because of violent crime. City Hall working with the police, working with the NHS, working with local authorities, working with families, civic society, have seen a decrease over the last year in relation to a number of things. It's not good enough. We're not complacent. So in the last year, there's been a decrease of 15% on the number of under 25s injured by knife injuries. We've seen actually the number of homicides of people who are under 25 going down. Not good enough. And we're doing what we can. We've got a public health approach in City Hall now where we're dealing with prevention
and yet,
as well as enforcement.
It's a record high. How long have you been mayor?
3.5 years. You know, I was on here 2 years ago, and Piers' son, unfortunately, was the victim of a horrific moped crime. And I came back, and I always come back when you ask me to do so. We had a...
And to be fair to you, you do. And we appreciate that. You do come in and you do answer tough questions.
And on moped crime, Piers, we had a 50% reduction on moped crime in 1 year. The good news is we've had a further 50% reduction in moped crime and moped...
So why are you being successful in that, but being so transparently unsuccessful in dealing with clearly what has become a massive problem, which is this mentality of young kids, and let's spell it out, in London, it's mainly young black teenagers in gangs stabbing each other to death. How do we change that mentality? What do we do about the gang culture that's creating it? How do we really get to grips with this?
Well, look, it's personal to me. I've got teenage daughters. Somebody died a stone's throw from my home not too long ago. In London, the facts are the vast majority of young Londoners are of a certain background and they live in deprived parts of London. You've got to deal with the causes as well as the consequences. So at a young age, give young people constructive things to do. You know what time of day most serious youth violence occurs? Between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. One of the explanations is after-school clubs have closed down, youth centres have closed down, young people don't have something constructive to do. That sense of belonging they get from joining a criminal gang, we've got to deal with. I've got 9-year-olds in London, 9-year-olds having knives in their possession because it makes them feel safe. We've got to deal with the, you know, the causes.
But why is it getting worse under you?
Well, actually, to be fair...
For 3 years, you've been talking about
Let me deal with that. Let me deal with that.
And you say, you know, I'm on top of it.
Let me deal with that head on.
But it's getting worse.
Well, this is no consolation if you're the victim of crime, but across the country, the last ONS figures show...
Let's talk about London.
Well, let me do it. Up 30%.
You're not mayor of the country.
Let me do this. Around the country, increase of 13%. In London, 0.7%. Not good enough. Not good enough. Under 25s gone down by 15%. Knife injuries gone down. Homicides.
Knife murders
For under 25s gone down.
No, in total.
It's end of year. We're not sure yet. The phrase used by the police is stabilisation.
Have more people been stabbed to death in London this year than last year?
No.
No?
No.
What's the numbers?
It's about 127.
To what?
Last year was 139.
But these are still huge numbers.
I'm not saying they're not, though, Piers. I've accepted that. Of course they are, and that's why I take it very seriously. It's the one thing that keeps me up at night time.
Everyone I know in London has got... I've got 3 sons, right? Everyone who's got kids out on the streets is apprehensive about sending their kids out now to bars, to clubs, to pubs, because there's a sense that this is out of control.
And also, Sadiq, I mean, you've talked about our personal experience. Alex Beresford, our weather presenter, you have the most raw personal experience of this.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like there does need to be more done, particularly in London. I feel like you could be more vocal, you know, on the issue of knife crime. It's not just about saying, you know, all the right things. It's about doing the right things as well. And Sadiq, you know that we've known each other for a little while. You know, we were part of the Reach role model programme, you know, back when Labour was in power. You know, I was lucky enough to be picked as one of the role models that was put together because there was a recommendation for the need for a national network of black role models that was unfortunately taken away when Conservative came into government. You know, there needs to be more done back in the community. I agree with lots of things that you're saying. Well, you know, there does need to be more done. You know, we've got young kids walking around with knives, carrying them out of fear. That's not an excuse to carry a knife, but it is a reason for it. And it is because our communities are completely infested with several different things. There's so many disadvantages going on.
Alex, tell us about how it's touched your family.
I mean, you know, words can't describe what it's like to lose one of your cousins to knife crime. And unfortunately, Nathaniel isn't the only person that I know that has lost his life to knife crime. It cuts you so deep inside, literally, you know, and there's not a week that goes by where I don't walk around the streets of Britain these days when someone doesn't come up to me and say, we're so sorry for what happened to your cousin. We're so glad that you spoke out that day on Good Morning Britain. I wish it could change. You know, this is an uphill struggle. It's not something that we're going to fix immediately, but people want an immediate fix.
Sadiq?
Can I respond, Alex? And what Alex was alluding to was when I was a government minister, we set up this scheme called Reach, And the idea was to promote positive role models like Alex, before he was a talented GMB presenter, people with potential, to give young people hope and aspiration that I too can be like Alex. And there are many other brilliant young people. It was a scheme that I was very proud to set up. As Alex said, got rid of in 2010. We've got to give young people hope, an alternative to joining a criminal gang and get-rich-quick mentality. And Alex, just to give you examples of walking the walk, you mentioned me talking the talk, is I've increased council tax because of government cuts to pay for additional policing, but also I've diverted business rates to invest in young people with the Young Londoners Fund. And by the way, businesses haven't complained. They welcome me diverting money from business rates to investing in young people. But, Alex, we've got dozens and dozens of youth clubs closed in London, hundreds of youth workers without jobs. We've got schools who can't have the money to teach, let alone provide after-school clubs. We've got young people without that hope. And the highest levels of violent crime are in the most deprived areas. And, look, you know, I'm as frustrated as you are because I feel it, man. I don't go to bed till my daughter's at home. You know, so Piers is talking about his 3 sons, Susanna about health children. Of course I feel it. And I live in the communities that you know about. That's where I live. And so it's personal to me. I'm responsible. The buck stops with me. It ain't good enough for me to blame the government, although they're responsible as well. I'm keen to work with the new Prime Minister, whoever he's going to be, with the new Home Secretary. I'll tell you this, though. For the last 3.5 years, and we've argued about this, where's the government been? They are responsible for 80% of the Met Police budget. They've cut £1 billion over the last 9 years.
Well, they say they're going to put more police back on the streets.
You won't get disagreement with me about that. And taking 20,000 police off the streets was a
21,000.
21 was a catastrophic
and only promising 20,000
failure
back
by government, and that was Theresa May.